Arizona and Wisconsin are the latest states to certify the results of their election for President-elect Joe Biden. The Arizona Republican Party is mounting a legal challenge to the state certification, and the Trump campaign has said it plans to file a lawsuit in Wisconsin. For his part, President Trump is continuing to repeat false claims and conspiracy theories about the election itself. CBS News White House correspondent Paula Reid has the latest.
President Trump continued his assault on the 2020 vote today, and even as he claimed total election corruption in Arizona,
all 15 counties have certified their results.
The state's Republican governor was certifying Biden's victory. And with the Trump campaign recount in Wisconsin failing to reverse Biden's win in the state, the president looked to Georgia, where he called on the Republican governor, Brian Kemp, to overrule the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, another Republican, and help him win the state.
The truth matters.
Raffensperger disputed the president's claim of voter fraud in the state and said today that third-party groups are continuing to spread false information.
There are those who are exploiting the emotions of many Trump supporters with fantastic claims, half-truths, misinformation, and frankly, they are misleading the president as well, apparently.
The president's repeated claims that the vote in Georgia was rigged is worrying Republican leaders ahead of the two key Senate runoffs in January.
I just wish Trump would stop, quite frankly.
GOP fundraiser Dan Eberhardt said Mr. Trump's rhetoric could lower Republican turnout and cost them the Senate.
Acting like a sore loser is just plain not helpful.
Christopher Krebs, the former top cybersecurity official Mr. Trump fired earlier this month, told 60 Minutes the president's voter fraud claims have no merit.
The proof is in the ballots. The recounts are consistent with the initial count, and to me, that's further evidence, that's confirmation that the systems used in the 2020 election performed as expected, and the American people should have 100% confidence in their vote.
President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris received their first full intelligence briefing on Monday. The president-elect's team is continuing to push forward with the transition process. Over the weekend, it announced more nominations for key administration posts, as well as staffers for top roles inside the West Wing. CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe has the latest.
As his presidential transition rolls on, Joe Biden himself suffered a physical setback this weekend after slipping while playing with his German Shepherd, named Major. His doctor said the 78-year-old has hairline fractures in the middle of his right foot and will likely require a walking boot for several weeks.
Because it's national security.
That didn't stop the president-elect from receiving his first top-level intelligence briefing since Election Day, previously blocked by President Trump. And Mr. Biden's staffing announcements today again included historic firsts, an all-female communications team.
I was just excited to come out here and chat with all of you.
With the most visible being former State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki, set to serve as press secretary. Janet Yellen will be the first woman nominated to be Treasury Secretary, and Neera Tanden is set to be White House Budget Director, the first woman of color to be nominated for the role. But some Republicans claim Tanden has been too critical of the president and several GOP lawmakers on Twitter, giving her little chance of being confirmed. John Corden of Texas telling reporters this afternoon,
I just think she's going to be radioactive.
Honestly, the hypocrisy is astounding. If Republicans are concerned about criticism on Twitter, their complaints are better directed at President Trump, who has made a hobby out of denigrating Republican senators on Twitter.
There is still a vacancy at the Pentagon, and CBS News has learned there are 3 contenders for Defense Secretary. Former Obama-era defense official Michelle Flournoy, retired Army General Lloyd Austin, and former Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson.
Paula Reid and Ed O'Keefe join me now. So, Paula, President Trump is continuing to make baseless claims of widespread election fraud. There is no evidence to support those claims, many of which have been dismissed in court. Yet the president continues to repeat them. Paula, is there an end game here? Does there appear to be an end game? And if so, what is it?
Well, there certainly doesn't appear to be any end in sight to the president's campaign to question and try to undermine the outcome of the presidential election. Over the weekend, he said that he believes 6 months from now, he will still be firm in his conviction that he won and that there was widespread fraud, even though his entire legal team has not been able to produce sufficient evidence to get past any initial review of these claims by a judge. You did, however, though, see some admission by the president this weekend that, look, his cases are not going to get to the Supreme Court. Even if they did, there's no way to litigate his way to 270 electoral votes. But in the meantime, keeping up this fight, it continues to really galvanize his base. It undermines the legitimacy of the incoming administration and also helps fundraise. And for a campaign that is carrying significant debt, that is very helpful.
So, Paula, the president is also targeting the Department of Justice, FBI, and Christopher Krebs, the nation's former top cybersecurity official. What are Mr. Trump's specific issues with them?
When it came specifically to Christopher Krebs, he came out and said that the election was valid, that it was one of the most secure in history, and that contradicted the president's narrative that there had been widespread fraud. Of course, contradicting the president is a good way to lose your job in this administration, and that's what happened to Christopher Krebs. He was, of course, unceremoniously fired by tweet, but he showed up with receipts in that 60 Minutes interview with Scott Pelley. He says, look, over 90% of the votes that were cast, they were also had paper proof, a paper trail, and he said that's what you need to verify the results here. He said there was no widespread fraud. He continues to dismiss the president's allegations of widespread fraud, and again, he has proof to back that up, something the president's attorneys have not been able to produce to support their allegations. But the Justice Department, the FBI, that's something a little different. Throughout this administration, we've seen the president lean on his Justice Department, pressing them often to advance politically motivated investigations. And here you hear him complaining that they are not involved, even though his Attorney General, Bill Barr, did send out a letter to U.S. attorneys telling them that they could go around normal protocols and flag and investigate any claims of irregularities or illegal practices. But the real concern here is that the president may be laying the groundwork to potentially fire his FBI director, Christopher Wray. You heard the president suggest in an interview with Fox News that the FBI or the Justice Department may have even been involved in this fraud. Again, no evidence to support that, but based on previous behavior, it suggests the president may be laying a pretextual case to fire yet another FBI director.
Well, Ed, you mentioned in your piece Janet Yellen and Neera Tanden. Senate Republicans appear open to confirming Yellen, but as we saw in your piece, are pushing back on Tanden. Explain why that is and what kind of confirmation battle could she face?
In some cases, Elaine, it's as simple as this. They don't like her tweets. All throughout the afternoon, we've seen Republican senators flagging the fact that for the last several years, she's been known to be a critical and outspoken critic of the president, of GOP lawmakers generally, of the Republican Party. To which Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer this afternoon on the floor of the Senate said, if you got an issue with her and her use of social media, let me introduce you to what the president was up to for the past 5 years, denigrating not only Democrats but also fellow Republicans, saying it's a bit of hypocrisy from Republican lawmakers who might be concerned. We'll see whether or not there's a real issue for her. Of course, the fact that she's the head of the Liberal Center for American Progress is probably a more pressing concern to many Republicans who wouldn't like to see such a liberal figurehead necessarily running White House budget policy and really all administration policy. It all passes through the Office of Management and Budget, that building next to the White House. Everything from drafting the budget to, signing off on administration officials' testimony to Congress, to the exact wording of policy all across the government. It's a very powerful position once you're in it, and that's probably why they're going to try to give her a run for her money. But the other thing to keep in mind, and this reinforces the importance of what's going to happen on January 5th down in Georgia, is we won't know whether Republican opposition to her even matters, frankly, until we see the results of those runoff elections in Georgia, when Jon Ossoff faces David Perdue, when Raphael Warnock faces Senator Kelly Loeffler. If the two Democrats are able to win, the Senate goes to 50-50, with Kamala Harris, the vice president, breaking any ties. If they lose those seats, Republicans have control. And yes, in a chamber where you just need a majority to approve a cabinet nominee, it could very well be an issue.
That's why we keep talking about Georgia pretty much every single day. And Ed, broadly speaking, what do the president-elect's picks for his economic team tell us about how his team plans to address the economic crisis that the country is facing because of the pandemic?
Well, for one thing, it'll be women making a lot of those decisions, and that's a first. Janet Yellen, if she's confirmed, would be the first woman to serve as Treasury Secretary. Incredible to think it's taken this long. And Neera Tanden would be the first woman of color to hold the position, the first of South Asian descent as well. And today, her defenders reporting out this is somebody who once lived in Section 8 federal subsidized housing, whose family was the recipient of food stamps, federal food stamps. So she comes to the position despite her credentials in recent years as a veteran of the Clinton and Obama administrations and campaigns, as somebody who also has sort of lived the federal experience, or the federal aid experience, if you will, by living in federal housing, taking advantage of the SNAP program and others as she was a young kid. So that's a part of it that will be emphasized. You're going to see others named tomorrow, a few other firsts, and it's a sign that Biden is very seriously enforcing what he said he would do, which is to make sure that his government reflected the diversity and the different perspectives of the country. You're going to see that in not only their Ivy League credentials in some cases, but in their lived experiences. And it's a very important factor in his ongoing search for cabinet officials at all levels.
Well, Paula, I want to turn back to something you mentioned in your piece. President Trump is criticizing Georgia's Governor Brian Kemp and its Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. Both are Republicans. Ed spelled out the stakes in Georgia, but what effect could that have on Georgia's upcoming Senate runoff?
Once again, the political consequences of mixed messages coming out of the Trump White House. The president says he will head to Georgia this weekend on Saturday to hold an outdoor event, trying to encourage people, his supporters, to show up for these runoff races coming up. But at the same time, he continues to attack the entire Georgia voting system and the officials who run it. So there are concerns among GOP officials, among fundraisers, that the president's rhetoric could potentially hurt turnout in a race that is incredibly critical, as Ed just laid out. So it'll be interesting to see the president and how he crafts his message. There's just really no telling whether he will be willing to bring these two Senate candidates down with him as he continues to attack the outcome of this election.
Right. Clearly, so many of his supporters are taking their cue from him. Ed, President-elect Biden has yet to become directly involved in that runoff. When might we see him or Vice President-elect Kamala Harris take a more active role in those elections?
Well, we don't know when exactly or how, but it is expected that at some point closer to the special election day, one or both of them will make appearances in the Peach State. Remember, in the closing days, it was former President Obama and now Vice President-elect Harris that spent more time in Georgia. Biden made a last-minute trip there because they saw something coming that worked out, obviously, narrowly in their favor. So we're waiting to see what exactly they'll do. Republicans were far quicker to quickly begin a national fundraising campaign to try to coordinate the messaging and the strategy of these two races. Democrats just today announcing a coordinated campaign between the two Democratic candidates, John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, that will work on fundraising and staffing and get out the vote efforts. All of it designed, again, to hold those or to win those two seats in Georgia. It's going to be a real uphill climb for Democrats. Remember, this isn't a state that has much of a Democratic voting history. Biden defying about 24 years of state political history by winning the presidential race in the state. Getting statewide Democrats elected hasn't happened really since earlier this century. So if they can pull it off with the work that's been done by various groups in the state over the last several years, it'll be quite an accomplishment, and of course quite critical to the potential fortunes of the Biden administration. And it's part of the reason why we're led to believe the Biden team, at least so far, has been quiet about what they may or may not do. They don't want to become the factor, much like they did throughout the presidential campaign. They're hanging back and letting the mixed messaging and confusion that Paula was outlining there from the president with members of his own party sort of dominate the conversation for now, believing that by allowing that to play out and letting Georgia voters see that chaos, perhaps they can come in later and make a more definitive and succinct pitch to voters who may still be on the fence.
It's really interesting to hear, and it'll be fascinating to listen to the president on Saturday and see what his message is. All right, Paula Reid and Ed O'Keefe, great to have you both. Thank you.
Take care.